Right. So the toady Mars, is it Mars? Well, very stylized. I don't know. What date it is, I don't know. As you may have realised by now, I'm very sceptical about art interpretation and dating by what things look like, and especially after the Capitoline wolf was shown to be medieval in date, it really makes you question this sort of analysis. However, of possibly the same date is this particular piece here. It was only when I started putting these slides together that I realised that this is the wrong background for a lot of the slides. So you can't see where the background stops and the slide starts. But this is one of the more famous pieces of early bronze work that you can see in Rome today. Again, it's thought to be of Etruscan origin. It's a bust of the L. Junius Brutus, a bust being the upper part of a human portrait. Well, this also was found in the... This is the head, a bronze head, life-size head, found in Rome in the Renaissance period. It was immediately identified as being a representation of a Roman politician, Lucius Junius Brutus. He's the guy, as I'll explain to you in the next week, who basically created the Roman Republic. Unfortunately, all that we have of this is the head, and it was cut down to fit into this marble body part there. So we don't know if this originally was part of a life-size statue or not. What we have here is the head of a rather stern-looking individual. As you can see, a sort of fierce look, of aquiline nose. A short, typically what we might think of as typically a Roman hairstyle and beard. It's these features which identify him as being a Roman, according to some art specialists. Romans didn't wear beards after about the 3rd century. Etruscans were more likely to have beards than Romans. Some Romans did during a period of mourning after a relative or a friend had died. But if we use the beard as dating evidence, if it's Roman, then it should be sometime no later than the 3rd century. It could have been made in the 4th century. The problem is here, though, in the 1st century BC, several Roman families, as they got richer and richer and became more and more important, would go round and say, I need some pictures of my ancestors. Can you make me a nice bronze bust of one of my ancestors? So it could be an entirely imaginary portrait made in the 1st century BC. We cannot date metal. So all these dates are done on stylistic grounds, and well, as we saw with the case of the Capitoline wolf, that doesn't work out. The traditional identification, Lucius Junius Brutus, there's nothing to support that identification at all. But you can see how when this was found in the Renaissance period, then people in Rome would leap on this as, yes, this has to be somebody incredibly important, and look at that sort of stern face, that purely Roman nose, those firm lips. This is a serious politician with nice heavy eyebrows like that. The eyes made of possibly bone, could be ivory with a glass insert. This is quite common. This is what we have in the toady Mars. So you can see how they would interpret this as quite probably being a prominent politician. Who is the most famous politician in Roman Republican history? Well, Junius Brutus, and that's why you can see this attribution comes up. There's also uncertainty about the date of the only surviving Roman statue, Roman inverted commas statue, that we can date before the end of the Republican period, so before the 1st century BC. This was a statue that was found not far from Perugia in Etruria, to the north of Italy in Etruria. It was found sometime in the late 16th century. when it's not certain if when found the right arm was complete or not. But if you look, you can see the right arm is completely out of scale to the rest of the body. The right arm is certainly a later addition, is a modification that's been restored. What it represents is very clearly the statue of a politician or general or somebody like that, an orator, somebody who's giving a speech. So it's usually known as the statue of the orator arrendatore in Italian. Actually, it is the statue of a known person, a man called Aulus Metellus. Well, the arm has been restored. As I explained, he is wearing a simple type of toga with this curved edge to it. Now, this is what we see in the Vei Apollo, of course. So this tends to make you think that this is Etruscan or something like that. And inscribed on the edge of the toga is this: Etruscan for to the memory of Aules Metellus, son of Vel and Vesi Tanini, a female, erected a statue of the votive offer by the will of the people, on behalf of the people. Well, Aules Metellus is the Etruscan version of a Latin name, Aulus Metellus. So this is the statue of a Roman. If you look at what he's wearing on his feet, he's got high lace-up boots, typical of a Roman senator. If you look at his hairstyle, Roman. Lack of a beard, Roman. So this statue combines aspects of Etruscanness with Romanness. It's found in Etruria. It has an Etruscan inscription on it. The name of the person is given in Etruscan, but the person's name is a Latin name, Roman hairstyle, Roman type boots. So this is certainly a Roman citizen. The date of it, again, this is much debated. The only thing that people agree on is that it's before the 1st century BC. But apart from that, absolutely no agreement at all. Well, we'll see in future classes that many of the things I've looked at today and in the last class, many aspects of Etruscan art and architecture influence Roman architecture and art. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And I'll be emphasising this and the similarities as we come to these. But there is one art style we associate with the Etruscans that the Romans never really adopted, and that was the idea of tomb painting. There is no consistent style in tomb architecture from one part of Etruria to another. Earlier this week we were looking at Serviteri, with the tombs there, the tomb of the reliefs, the tomb of the shield and the chairs, fairly organised plans, rectangular underground tombs with a tumulus on the top. There are certain tombs which don't quite fit in with that classification, like the Rigoni tomb, which is a long chamber. What we find in other parts of Etruria, though, particularly the area around Tarquinia, are single tombs designed for only two bodies, husband and a wife, seems to be the case. Tarquinia and also at Vulci to a certain extent. These tombs are elaborately painted. Now, in theory, we should be able to date these paintings quite accurately, because they are frescoes and the black in them will contain carbon, and the carbon can of course be carbon-14 dated, but nobody's ever tried to do this. They're generally dated on artistic grounds. The earliest seems to be date to around about the mid-6th century BC. They're wonderful in many ways because they tell us about different aspects of Etruscan life, social life. They tell us about funeral competitions, They also give us some ideas of mythology, and they also, if you look at this one very carefully, tell us something about the sex life of the Etruscans, where homosexuality seems to have been relatively accepted, not necessarily common. All these tombs have been given modern names, so the Tomb of the Bulls, because of those particular bull figures on either side there. You could have called it the Tomb of the Griffins. You've got a griffin up there, unless it's a chimera. Oh, it goes to chimera. Look, there it is. I hadn't noticed that before. Not quite what you would expect. Yes, it's got the lion's head there, the goat's head coming out, the body coming back, winged in this case, and the tail like a snake. But what we are looking at in this particular tomb here, the Tomb of the Bulls, is its representation of mythology. Mythology is understood by the Etruscans. Well, this represents a scene from the Trojan War. This represents a scene during the Trojan War in which Achilles is hiding behind a fountain and is about to jump out and ambush Troilus, who comes on the horse over there. These are all made frescoes. Frescoes are paintings in the wall plaster. So the sketching is done and then the paint is applied. If you make a mistake, you've got a little bit of a problem in that particular case. Very different from secco, which are dry paintings on plaster. What's funny? What did I get wrong? It's my tie. You saw my tie. Okay. So it is actually sort of frescoes done in wet plaster. Well, here's Achilles with his helmet, hiding behind a fountain which has got two lion carvings on top of it. You can see it's a fountain, the water's coming out there and going into this drinking bowl there. Very heavily stylized tree, and we can recognize the scene. Here comes Troilus on his horse, coming along, not aware of the fact that Achilles is about to jump out and kill him. I mean, that's what it is. The proportions, of course, are completely and utterly wrong. It's difficult to believe that the artist couldn't actually represent accurate proportions if he wanted to. So there has to be some symbolism behind this. The horse, for example. We know that horses in the Roman period and the ancient Greek period were not much bigger than ponies. They don't have stirrups. You see? So your feet are dangling just above the ground level. The horse was never that particular big. What is important, though, I think we can all agree on, is that the artist wants to show the story. He's not so concerned with the accuracy of the proportions and that sort. Well, there is quite probably, and the textbook talks about this, another message in this particular scene, or the choice of this scene. And Achilles, of course, is the great hero from the Trojan Wars, and it may, the choice of the subject matter may indicate that the owner of the tomb wanted to be identified with Achilles as somebody who was a really brave warrior. I don't know, you can talk about this type of thing for ages, and as you already know, I'm very sceptical about art interpretation, but we'll continue with that. That's why I don't teach ways of seeing. If I taught ways of seeing, it would probably only last for 2 courses, and 2 classes, and then we'd be finished. Let's look at another example of these now. I find these really lovely, and I could easily give you a whole 2-hour class on them, but that would take up far too much time. This is a tomb of hunting and fishing, so called because of the main scene within the tomb is actually hunting and fishing. But I want you to look at this top part here. Many of these tomb paintings show us aspects of everyday life. Now, the interior of the tomb is carved like a house, the interior of a house with a sloping roof. So you end up with a triangular panel at the end of the tomb. In a temple, of course, in a Greek temple, this would be filled with sculpture. Etruscan temples don't have sculpture in the pediment, as we would call it. But the pediment in the tombs is always filled with a painting of some kind. What we have in this particular tomb pediment painting is a symposium. Symposium, remember, is when people sit down for a formal meal, not a long intellectual discussion as what it's supposed to be these days. In the Greek-speaking world, which is where the symposium originates, this was men only. But the Etruscans, men and women. The Etruscans are very different in that way. And what we have here, just think back to those wedding sarcophagi we were looking at earlier, the same type of scene. The man reclining on a couch, this is normal way of sitting down for a meal. He would recline on a couch. He's got his wife with him. His wife's got that characteristic Etruscan headdress there. They're both sort of raising drinking cups to each other. He's holding another sort of wine cup in his hand there. There's one musician over here. There's a bag hanging from the roof, as it were, of the building. Presumably children over here, but it could be servants. Over this side, very definitely servants. Now you can see the shape of a wine amphora there. And this is the servant who's using a scoop to get wine from there to put it into a jug. You can even see the lid of the jug is raised up. So you do get these wonderful little scenes of everyday life in an Etruscan household. The main scene that we can see in this particular part here does show a group of people hunting and fishing. Not just hunting and fishing though, as I'll explain in a moment. But you've got a slingman over here, standing on a rock. He's using his sling to knock ducks from the air. You've got the fishermen down here, dolphins and so forth. Not shown on this particular picture though is this really amazing drawing of a diver. Now there's probably some mythological story behind this. You can't see otherwise why this would feature. Why would you have the painting of a diver in the middle of a hunting and fishing scene? And as you can see, somebody's crept up behind the diver. So this may be a scene taken from Etruscan mythology that we just don't know about. Over there on the other side is the boy with the slingshot. And here's a detail showing the actual fisherman. I like this guy here. Anybody here go fishing? You know about fishermen. Oh, you should have seen the one I nearly caught last week. It was this big. Yeah. That's exactly, it was this big. But there's a little guy over here, he's got his fishing net hanging over while the dolphins are jumping up and down. Little eye on the front of the boat. So it's a beautiful painting, beautifully done, of an everyday scene. Some of the paintings focus more on ceremonies associated with the funeral, and this is true of the tomb of the augurs. Well, again, the pediment has got a painting showing a lion and a lioness capturing a deer there. You've got a false door here. This is the painted door. We're looking from the entranceway. These are the two beds where the bodies were left, husband and wife, as far as we can see in all cases. It gets its name because of these two figures here. These are augurs. Augurs are the people who can read the future. Well, not so much read the future, but they can tell you if something's going to be good or bad according to the way the clouds look, the way the birds fly, the way the fish are swimming in the fish pool. This is what augurs do. And these are named people as augurs. They're sort of interpreting the future like that. Whether something's going to be a good deed or a bad deed. I love these little pointed shoes he's got there. And again, this typical Etruscan curvature to the toga or outer garment. Let's just pop back to this view. What we have inside the tomb painted on the walls two quite different scenes on this wall here. We've got a scene of two boxes. It looked like they're two boxes. But over here, we have this person, Fair Sue. Fair Sue is a feature of Etruscan funeral ceremonies. He's the masked man. He wears a mask and he runs away from everybody. He seems to be carrying the spirit of the person with him. There's a lot of debate about what Fair Sue represents. Remember, the last person we know of to speak, and presumably write Etruscan, was the Emperor Claudius in the 1st century AD. So we don't know all the details of Etruscan mythology. But beautiful, very careful work. Remember, fresco. This is wet paint in wet plaster. You make a mistake, you can't wipe it out. You've got to put more plaster on and start all over again. So here we have Fair Sue, the masked man. And on the other side, what we have is this wrestling match scene. The Etruscan funerals were associated with chariot races, gladiatorial competitions, shows of different types. Wrestling matches seem to have been part of the tradition as well. We don't fully understand everything, but here you've got two naked wrestlers. Again, you see them with their characteristic Etruscan hairstyles there. You've got the referee over here. The referee is holding this curved stick called a letus. I'll talk more about this in another class. But that indicates that he's also a priest as well. And you've got in the background here, this is the prize for the wrestling match, a set of presumably silver and a gold bowl, something like that. We can't be totally certain. So all of these paintings full of lovely detail, really impressive detail. Well, it's the tomb of the lionesses. There are the lionesses there, and this is another one of these tombs in which we have representations of a funeral scene. So we've got various people running around dancing and so forth. You've got two servants here on either side of one of these large wine jars, filling cups from this and taking this to the diners, who are painted on either side of the tomb here. And again, the beds for the dead people on either side. Well, this is one of the dancing figures in this particular tomb, very heavily made up. The tradition is that white figures are female, dark figures are male. This goes back to the basic belief that in wealthy families, females don't go outside in the sunshine, they don't get sunburned, you know, that sort of thing. The English expression, blue blood, meaning you come from a royal family. Well, you see, you don't go out in the sunshine to work, so you can see the veins, and they look blue, don't they? If you're pale, you can see blue veins, blue blood. If you're pale, you're not going out in the sunshine, you don't have to work. You must be rich, you must be royalty. So we've got this dancer here, probably part of a funeral ceremony, and you can see how the artist made a slight mistake. Whoops-a-daisy, I put the nose in the wrong place. Ah well, they're going to close the tomb when I finish, so nobody will ever see it. Again, a male over here with these beautiful pointed shoes. Unfortunately, the frescoes have gone in certain parts, so you can't always see what there is. More dancing scenes. Here, a woman dancing in what is clearly very fine silk, because you can see the folds of the costume over the curvature of the body. So, representing somebody very wealthy, where does silk come from? It has to come from the east. Dancing with a man over there who is holding a wine jug, another wine jug behind him as well. And then on the sides of the tomb, you've got these remarkable scenes, a wonderful series of paintings of dolphins along the bottom. But you have a representation, presumably, of the man buried in the tomb. He's lying back on a dining couch, one knee raised there. You can just see the shape of his drinking glass, and he's holding an egg. It's not a hard-boiled egg. He's not going to make a sandwich out of it or something like that. Egg as a symbol of everlasting life, rebirth. So that's presumably what this particular scene means here. The tomb of the triclinium, again, one of these scenes that is just so full of life. I mean, it's a pity that they only did these paintings inside the tombs. Or did they? We don't know much about Etruscan domestic architecture. But you get a general idea of the dancing scene here. Again, you've got a woman in very heavy clothing here, dancing with a man there. You've got another female dancer there, and a guy playing the pipes over there. It's whether these are part of the funeral ceremony or not, we still really don't know. I mean, but obviously these are thought to be suitable for tomb architecture. And always, everywhere, you'll see flying birds as well. And it's a very ecstatic dance, but you know, it tells us about what people are wearing. We don't know what Romans are wearing at this time, but we do know what the Etruscans are wearing. In later tomb paintings, we get more of a sense of realism, individual paintings. This is the tomb of a man called Orcus, and you have this wonderful portrait of a person. We know it's a portrait of a person because their name is here. We've only got the first two letters showing on this slide, but it's Velia. The name is right by the head. You find other examples of this in the same tomb. So this is meant to represent a real person. Well, Velia's got a very, very straight nose, almost a very Greek nose, very full red lips. She's got beautiful sort of little ringlets hanging down to in front of her ears. She's got a little wreath, probably of silver. We have lots of finds of gold headdresses from Hellenistic tombs, not from Etruscan tombs, so possibly a silver one here. And you can see she's got a hairnet at the back to keep her hair together. And she's wearing that lovely little necklace as well. But whether it is an accurate portrait of Velia, we can't say. But it's certainly intended to be a portrait. All the ones we've looked at so far have been connected with scenes of everyday life, with happy scenes for the future, life after death, life while still alive, that sort of thing. There is only one Etruscan tomb that we know of that seems to show an actual event in history as opposed to just a general stylized theme. And this is the tomb at a place called Völki. It's known as the Francois tomb after the archaeologist who excavated it. This is covered with scenes of warriors fighting each other. On one wall, we have scenes of warriors fighting a ruler whose name is given in Etruscan as Maxtrana. Maxtrana seems to be the Etruscan equivalent of a Roman king's name, Servius. Seems to be, we can't be certain. Another scene, though, on one of the other walls very clearly does represent a historical event, even though we don't have the historical record for it. What you've got here is the winged angel of death. You featured in some Etruscan tombs. You've got this person with the axe hammer there, who featured in gladiatorial games. When a gladiator was wounded and definitely wouldn't survive, he would come on and go bang on the head with a very heavy hammer, so the person would die. Gladiatorial games start off in the Etruscan world as a way of celebrating the life of the dead person and showing the power of life over death, the willingness to face death, if you like. But what we've got here is not a gladiatorial fight. What we've got are prisoners. Look at that man there, his hand tied behind his back. He's being led in by another warrior. And down here you've got this guy who's just having his throat cut by a warrior there while the Angel of Death watches on. Underneath him, and it's very faded now, but infrared photography does reveal it, is a name, Cneve Tarquinius Rumac. Cnaves, the Etruscan equivalent of the Latin Cnaeus, Tarquinius Rumac of Rome, the Roman. Well, we know that a family called the Tarquins were rulers of Rome at one point. So this may represent a historical episode. If so, this is unique and very important to know about, because we will see that in Roman art, historical narrative is a very important element. Towards the, this was painted sometime in the 6th century, but as Etruscan tombs go on later and later, we seem to lose that sense of joy in living, and wall paintings in the tombs take on a rather sort of more, not so happy approach. So you start to see the appearance of mythological creatures from the Greek-speaking world, like the Typhon, here with legs like a sea serpent who come out here, a Typhon holding up the roof. But Typhons tend to be associated with sort of the underworld, a not very happy time, that sort of thing. And this very famous one, the Tomb of the Blue Devil, actually showing you the Blue Devil, holding snakes in his hand. It seems to give you more of a sense of the fear of death, the reality of hell, that sort of thing there. Well, all these tombs, of course, just like the ones in Cerveteri, contain large numbers of grave goods for the person who was buried there. And again, I'm following the textbook here. What you frequently find in these tombs are bronze mirrors like this. The Etruscans were incredibly good bronze workers. The front of the mirror, very finely polished, so that you could see your reflection in it. The back of the mirror, always carved with some scene from mythology, Etruscan mythology, general Greek mythology. Remember that in the ancient world, you have this practice of syncretism. Syncretism allows you to identify one of your gods with a god from somewhere else. So what we find in some Etruscan art is what might be syncretism, in the sense of it might be an Etruscan version of a Greek story. We can't always be entirely certain on that. But you do see, for example, a large number of Greek-inspired figures from Greek-inspired mythology. So you've got, this is a man in a chariot. The chariot is being pulled by two centaurs. There's the head of one, there's the head of the other. Clearly Etruscan, Etruscan writing going around that way, and the Etruscan inscription of the owner going around the edge of the mirror there. You've even got the name of the chariot driver placed over on one side there as well. Some of these tomb mirrors seem to have been deliberately made in advance for burial within the tomb, because a few of these mirrors do actually have written on the front of them, and I couldn't find an example of this, the Etruscan word suthina, which means belonging to the tomb. They couldn't be used as a mirror. So the word suthina, I couldn't find an example. I know my writing is bad, and those of you who are not used to reading my writing, they've had 3 years of practice, so they're a bit more advanced in this. Hercules, well, I've already mentioned Hercules, of course, with the Apollo, with the temple at Veii, and one of the labours of Hercules there. Now, which one is this? I don't know which one this is. I can't work this one out. But you recognisably Hercules there. He's got his club. That may very well say Hercules there. My Etruscan is even worse than my Greek, and my Greek is almost non-existent. But you should be able to work out what this story is, because of course the snake head's in the back there. Remember, there are 12 labours of Hercules, technically, but just like there are supposed to only be 7 hills of Rome, there are many more. There are many more labours of Hercules than 12. This character is fascinating. This is Chalcas. We know his name. It's written there. A strange feature about Etruscan writing is it starts off always being written right to left, and then they start going from left to right. Early Etruscan is backwards, but here you've got Chalcas. You can see the name quite clearly there. Well, Chalcas is a figure who, in Etruscan mythology, he can tell the future. And this is actually what he's doing here. He's a winged figure there. He's holding something in his hand. Any guesses what he's holding?
Liver.
It's a liver. You can read the future from the liver. So that's actually what he's got there in that hand. Chalcas, and then you get the Dioscuri, the twins. Again, we know the twins from Greek mythology, we know them from Roman mythology, we know them from Etruscan mythology. Is this syncretism? Are we seeing the Etruscans taking on something from the Greek world that doesn't exist in their own mythological tradition? We really don't know. Sometimes you get these purely mythological scenes, like you've got the warrior here, you can just see his helmet there, he's fighting a winged, or he's pleading with a winged deity, a winged god of some particular type there. Mirrors like this, when buried in tombs, were usually kept in a cista. The name simply means a chest or a container. So that's what a cista is. And of course the textbook does draw attention to this one. This is really quite a large piece of bronze, the Ficodoni cista, found by a man or owned by a man called Ficodoni, which is why we have that particular name. There's a lot of debate about whether these are Etruscan or not. Almost all the examples that we have been found in the area of Praenesta. And Praenesta is within Latium, not within Etruria. But as the textbook points out, these are beautifully carved with wonderful scenes. This particular one carved with stories from the story of the, or scenes from the story of the Argonaut. We've got on the top Dionysus, the god of wine, with 2 satyrs. There are 3 separate scenes going around the whole cista in this particular case. Here we have King Amycos. King Amycos, who made the mistake of challenging the Dioscuri, the twins, to a fight. The twins are Castor and Pollux. Pollux, of course, immortal, cannot die. Pollux naturally wins the fight, and so he ends up tying Amyntas the king to a tree there. Well, we're going to see more about the effect of the Etruscans on their political successors, if you like, eventual ruler, the Romans, in future classes. But I think one thing the textbook doesn't entirely make clear is that although the Etruscans linguistically and ethnically are very separate from the Latin people and Euro-Italian people, although they introduced Greek art and Greek concepts of art to the Latin and Euro-Italic people, they should be seen as part of the same tradition in many ways. I think that's very important to know about that. So much for the Etruscan. What about Rome? Well, I think I've still got 10 minutes or so, haven't I?
8.
Hmm? What?
8.
8? Oh. Well, I can do this very quickly. Very quickly. Just to remind you about the foundation of Rome, I will next week start off with a bit more detail about early Rome. That's not given in the textbook. But I want you to just be aware of the legends regarding the foundation of Rome, because it's very important to understand Roman architecture and art. The Romans themselves were terribly confused about their origins. What doesn't help is that nobody even tried to work out their origin to the 3rd century BC. But by the end of the 2nd century BC, 1st century BC, they had more or less a common story. Rome is just a small part of the area we know as Latium, the Latin-speaking area of ancient Italy. And the story the Romans came up with takes their origins back to the Trojan War. According to Roman tradition, at the end of the Trojan War, which according to them was about 1130 BC, only one Trojan warrior managed to escape. You've all seen the film Troy. He's the guy who takes the sword of Troy. I will. Well, he doesn't take the sword of Troy. That's completely and utterly wrong. As is the fact that the film Troy doesn't explain it takes place over 10 years. You don't see any of the guys getting old, do they? 10 years, the women are still just like that, right at the end, so the guys. By the by. According to Roman tradition, Aeneas was the only Trojan warrior to survive the fighting. He escaped from Troy carrying his father, Anchises, on his shoulder, taking his son Julius Ascanius, or Ascanius Julius, with him. He doesn't take the sword of Troy, he takes the gods of Troy with him, 2 little gods. Aeneas and the others then are involved in an amazing journey that takes them all around the Mediterranean until one day they arrive at Latium. They arrive at Latium, they meet a woman called Roma. Now, Aeneas is a bit of a special character. His father is Anchises, but do you know who his mother was? Venus. Remember, the gods can come down in human form. So Aeneas is a bit of a special character. And King Latinus, the king of Latium, Latinus, Latin, yes, you can see how the names come up, allows Aeneas to marry his daughter. Aeneas then becomes king, Ascanius Julius becomes king, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. Now remember this point about Aeneas. Is the son of a mortal, Anchises, and a goddess, Venus. We'll be coming back to this again later. Well, many years later, something like 300 years later, members of his family are still rulers of Latium. But one of the kings, or the ruling king, Numitor, is murdered by a jealous younger brother, Amulius, who now becomes king. Numitor didn't have any sons. Amulius wants to make certain that he can't be threatened. Numitor does have a daughter called Rhea Silva, so he locks her away in the palace, where one night when she's fast asleep, Mars comes down and goes, whoa, whoa, hey. And 9 months later she gives birth to 2 twins called Romulus and Remus, except they're not called Romulus and Remus at this point. When King Amulius discovers this, he can see that they might be a threat to him. So he orders Rhea Silva to be tied up and thrown into the Tiber, and he says, do the same thing with the twins. But the servant takes pity on the twins and puts them in a little basket, and they float down the river. Have you heard this story before? Moses and the River Nile, Gilgamesh and either the Tigris or the Euphrates, depending on which one you want. It's a very, very traditional story in mythology. The basket eventually comes ashore, and the she-wolf finds them, a she-wolf, and she adopts them. In Roman tradition, the she-wolf has a name, Lupa. Lupa is Latin for she-wolf. Lupa is also Latin for prostitute. Worth bearing this in mind because of, there could be some truth to the story of the twins, but they were actually found by a prostitute, not by a she-wolf. Anyway, the she-wolf looks after the twins until one day a shepherd called Faustulus comes along, takes them home, adopts them, and gives them the name Romulus and Remus. Well, they become bandits, and they're looking for a safe place to live. And they eventually come back to the place, when they're about 20 or so, they come back to the place where they were found, where Lupa had found them. And they decide they're going to build a fortified enclosure there, defences. The only problem is they can't agree on which hill exactly to build their fortification, nor can they agree on which hill exactly was the one where they were found. So, Romulus and Remus end up having a quarrel, traditionally on April the 21st, 753 BC. Romulus kills Remus, builds his city, which he calls Rome. And this is what we're going to talk about. But one interesting thing about the name Rome? Rome is a pre-Indo-European name that's found in parts of Anatolia and Thrace, and it means village. Just bear that in mind when next time you're told about Romulus as being the founder of Rome. Okay then, this is where we're going to start next week. The official 7 Hills of Rome. Don't forget to sign this wonderful piece of paper at the front.